Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Alright, so in this video I'm going to be focusing on this piece right here, and this piece is a beautiful mahogany piece. Has crotch mahogany on the drawer faces and a beautiful mahogany veneer on the top and sides. This piece was actually one of 3 pieces. I got a whole bedroom set for $225 off of Facebook Marketplace. And the other 2 pieces, which is another dresser and a nightstand, I'm going to be doing in my next video. Now this piece really is gorgeous. You could see the beautiful carved feet right here and beautiful carved details along the trim. Now the finish on this piece is very bad. You can see there's a bunch of scratches on the drawer faces and the top, and most of that was not me, but some of that was, and I'll show you why in a second. Now the hardware on this piece I'm not crazy about, but it is solid brass, so I'm going to polish them up and keep this piece original. Now inside the drawers there's a beautiful mahogany veneer, and I looked in every single drawer and I can't find any maker's mark anywhere. But that's okay, I'll do some research and see what I find. Now here's what I was talking about with the finish. It is so bad that with my fingernail I'm able to basically scrape it off all the way down to the raw wood. And I'm really not putting that much pressure. So that's really the main reason why I wanted to refinish this set. A couple other things that I'm going to have to address is this sticky drawer. And there's a little bit of damage up by the edge banding right here and a little bit of bubbling as well. So I'm going to have to glue that down and make a couple veneer patches. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, and let's begin. Alright, so I'm going to begin by removing this hardware. And this hardware, like I said before, I'm not really that crazy about, but don't get me wrong, it is pretty beautiful in its own right. It's very ornate, very intricate in its designs, and I know that it's going to shine up beautifully when I'm finished. I'm just going to begin scraping down this piece with my carbide scraper. And one thing I want to mention right here is you always have to be careful when you're scraping a piece, because right here on the top, the edge banding is actually overlaying the veneer, as you can see right here. So if I were to scrape the entire span of the top of this piece, I would actually tear the edge banding right off. So you just want to make sure that while you're scraping, you're aware of where the edge banding lies in relation to the veneer. So all I'm really doing is I'm just scraping up until about an inch before the edge. And then to take care of the remaining bits, I'm going to come in on about a 45-degree angle and very gently get the remainder off. And I'll show you that in a second. And you always want to be very careful when you're scraping along the edges. You can see I'm only using one hand because it really takes minimal pressure to be able to get that finish off. And I don't want to gouge the wood, which is pretty easy to do when you're scraping along the edge. And here, just like I was talking about, I'm scraping on a 45-degree angle just to minimize the risk of accidentally catching and tearing that edge banding. You really got to be so careful. One wrong move and that edge banding is coming right off. So just take your time. Now, one strange thing that I found on this piece is that the edge banding on the sides are actually running vertical and the edge banding in the middle of the dresser is running horizontal. I almost made a mistake and started scraping in the wrong direction, and that would have been pretty bad. I did have to scrape cross grain just a little bit right here just to get that last little bit off, but I was doing it very gently. And here was a little bit tricky too, because I had to scrape basically across the patches of veneer that were missing, and I had to make sure that I didn't tear it even further. But I've been doing this long enough to where I can kind of tell if I'm going to catch or if I'm going to tear the veneer off. It's very much like a muscle memory type of thing. So I'm just going very slowly. I'm just taking my time, not rushing, which is honestly a little hard for me because I'm used to working pretty fast. So it's always good to kind of remind yourself just to slow down and take your time. And here I'm just going to start working on the sides. And again, you could see I'm only using one hand right here because that finish is so brittle that it's coming off with so little pressure. And I just wanted to stress the fact that especially on the edges, you definitely want to take your time and go gentle because it's very easy to gouge the wood on the corners and edges. Now these first 3 top draws were a little bit tricky because they have a little bit of a bow in the middle, and I'm not going to be able to scrape with the grain because if I scraped with the grain I would easily gouge the wood because of that curve. So you're going to see that I am scraping against the grain in mostly the middle part of the draw, which is highly not recommended, but it actually turned out to be fine. I was extremely careful and I took my time and it just worked out. And the thought did cross my mind to use a chemical stripper on these first 3 draws, but I'm stubborn and I decided to try scraping and see how that went. And luckily no issues. But I just had to mention that you really don't want to scrape against the grain because you could really mess up the wood. Now for all the decorative bits, I'm going to use a chemical stripper. I use Clean Strip Premium Stripper. I find that this stripper really cuts through those layers of finish or paint or whatever you're working with very well. And I've tried a number of strippers. The stripper is definitely the best. And just for anybody who's not really aware of what paint stripper is, it's basically a cocktail of a bunch of different chemicals that break down paint or the finish and make it so much easier to remove. And with this stuff, you want to make sure that you're wearing a respirator and you're definitely wearing gloves. And you can see my little respirator strap is dangling right here. So don't worry, I'm wearing one. But this stuff is extremely toxic, so you want to make sure that you're wearing protective equipment. Because if you get this stuff on your skin, it'll burn so bad, and the smell is just very strong. So, I mean, all I'm really saying is just be careful. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying the stripper, I'm letting it sit for about 5, maybe 10 minutes, and then I'm coming in with a stripper pad, which is an abrasive pad that just helps you to scrub the finish off. And it was working okay, but I actually ended up switching to a nylon brush because I really needed to get into all those very small gaps and decorative spaces, and that little stripper pad wasn't really cutting it. And once I've scrubbed all that finish off, I'm going to come in with some acetone just to clean up all that residue. And just try to ignore the giant mess that I'm making. Refinishing is a lot of fun, but it is very messy, especially when you're working with paint stripper. And you can see that shop towel that I'm using is basically disintegrating. So I just switched over to a rag just to finish up. And this actually happened to me on one of my last projects, the towel disintegrating on me. So you'd think I would learn, but I guess not. And I'm just taking a dental tool just to pick out all the remaining finish that's in those really tiny cracks and all those decorative bits, because when I go to hand sand a little bit later on, if that finish is remaining, it's going to gum up my sandpaper. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting as much of that finish off as I can before I sand. And I'm just going to start here with a 180 grit since I got pretty much all the finish off via scraping. And you can see I have my little rubber block over here, and I showed you guys in the last video, but this rubber block is just awesome for getting rid of any buildup on your sandpaper that you have. So you definitely want to check that out. And all I'm doing here with the 180 grit is I'm just getting the majority of the leftover color out. I don't want to go in and try to get every little scratch and every little imperfection out with my 180 grit because I don't want to burn through the veneer. After I do basically the bare minimum with my 180 grit, then I'm going to come in with my 220 grit, and with that, I'm going to get all the imperfections out, all the scratches, all the color, and even everything out. If I were to try to get everything out with my first grit, I would easily go through that veneer. Now the first few draws that I sanded, I was pretty straightforward. I just sanded them as normal. And same thing here with the flat surfaces on the curved draws. And here you can see the pretty heavy staining on the draws from the hardware, but I'm going to be reusing the hardware, so those will disappear. And for the curved part of the draws, I'm going to be using a foam pad from Surf Prep. And this foam pad is great for contour sanding and sanding all those curved surfaces and all those detailed surfaces that I'm going to have to sand. And I'm going to just start sanding down the rest of the piece to prepare it for staining. And you're going to see I'm switching between a combination of using my foam pad, hand sanding, and just regular power sanding. And just like on one of my previous pieces, I'm actually going to be leaving some of the color that's in these detailed areas because I'm going for more of like a rustic kind of a look for this piece, and I'm actually going to be staining the trim on this piece black. So I think leaving some of that color is actually going to help with the look that I'm kind of going for. And I chose to stain the trim black just because I feel like any other color wouldn't really give the contrast that I was kind of looking for. I always tend to go dark on the trim when I have really beautiful veneer such as crushed mahogany or burled walnut. And I feel like the contrast between the black and the beautiful crotch mahogany drawers is going to look really nice. I know that look probably isn't for everybody, and there's definitely going to be people that don't like it, but that's okay. That's what makes the world interesting. And you can see right here how that foam pad just contours to the very decorative details on this piece. It makes it so much easier to sand. And here I'm just going to give the inside of the carcass a really nice sanding. This is something that I really like to do just to make sure that it's thoroughly sanded and nice and clean inside. And before I start staining, I'm just going to fix that edge banding that was kind of lifting a little bit. And for that, I'm using this glue syringe, which is going to make it so easy to get in those little cracks and crevices without doing any damage to the edge banding itself. And these things are pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use. You can buy them on Amazon, and they come in a bunch of different sizes. And you can even buy flexible needles too, which is very convenient for those really tight spots. And all I'm really doing here is I'm just sticking the needle right in the area that I'm trying to get the glue into. Injecting some glue and moving the syringe around a little bit just to make sure that I get the glue in all the spots that have lifted. And whenever you're doing glue ups like this, you just want to make sure that you have a nice glue squeeze out. And you can see here, as I'm pushing the veneer, you can see the glue just kind of squeezing out of the cracks. And that just means that basically there's enough glue in the spot that you're trying to glue up. And here I'm going to start making my stain. And I'm using some Odie's Safer Solvent. I'm using a black pigment by Odie's Mr. Cornwall's Creative Colors, which are great pigments. And you can see I'm not even wearing gloves, and that's because Odie's, the Odie's products are non-toxic and also food safe, which is one of the many reasons why I like Odie's. After I stirred the Safer Solvent and the pigment around, I'm going to add my Odie's Super Duper Everlasting Oil, and you want to give this stuff a really good mix before you pour it in. I don't have an exact recipe for the stain that I'm making. I usually just kind of wing it every time. So you can always experiment and find the right recipes for your own projects. And here I got my little maple test board that I'm using, and it looks pretty good. This is basically what I was looking for. So now I'm just going to take a 1500 grit Merkur Milan pad, and I'm going to just start applying the stain. And you can see I taped off certain sections just because I didn't want to get any stain on the mahogany veneer. And just like any other stain, you're going to wipe it on and wipe it right off. I wiped it on, waited for about maybe 5 minutes, and then just came in with a shop towel and wiped it off. I did it in sections just because I didn't want it to dry on me, which can sometimes happen, so I was just being on the safe side. I'm just going to stain the inside rails over here just because I like to make it look nice and neat. And I know you're not even going to be able to see it with the drawers in, but it just makes me feel better knowing that it's nice and neat and symmetrical. I'm just taking off the tape here, and I think it came out pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with the final result and the look that this black stain gives to the piece. Okay, so now it's time for some veneer patches, and I happen to have a nice little piece of crotch mahogany veneer, and I'm hoping that it's going to match the edge banding pretty well. And all I'm going to be doing here is taking this razor blade and I'm going to score the edge banding and basically make a new shape, cutting some of the edge banding away to make it easier to fit the patch of veneer in. I hope that made sense. You'll see what I mean if you didn't understand that. And you can see I was just using a chisel just to clean up the edges and make it nice and straight, tracing out the new shape with a piece of tape and a pencil. And I just found a piece of veneer over here that matched the edge banding close enough, and I'm just cutting out my patch, and I'm going to put some glue on the back of it, attach it, and tape it up. And of course, whenever you're making veneer patches, you always want to make sure that the piece that you're cutting out, the grain, is running in the same direction as the grain that you're trying to match it to. Because if you don't, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, and you're just going to have to redo it. I know that sounds like an obvious thing to remember, but I've actually done it before, so... And just a side note, I didn't show it, but I did clamp up the entire side of the edge banding. And this little chip was more on the small side, so I'm just going to put some wood filler there and color match it later on. And back to sanding. So I'm doing the pencil trick again here, and all the pencil trick is when you draw light pencil marks onto the wood so that when you sand, as those pencil lines disappear, you're going to know that you've sanded just enough. As soon as those pencil lines disappear, you move on to the next spot. You don't stay in one spot and burn through the veneer, which is very easy to do. It's a great way to keep track of where you have sanded and where you haven't sanded and get a nice even sanding. And this is going to be my final sanding of 320 grit. And again, I'm using the foam pad from Surf Prep just to do the middle parts of these curved draws. And if you're going to be using a foam pad on draws like this, you want to make sure that you're being very gentle on the edges because it's very easy to go through the veneer with a foam pad on the edges. So just wanted to throw that in there. And the last thing I'm going to do before I put my finish on is just sand down this wood filler that I put over my veneer patches. I should have done this before I stained, but it's alright, I'll just touch it up off camera. And for all you guys who have watched all my videos up until now, it's pretty obvious to tell that I love Odie's oil. I find that it really gives the wood just such a beautiful finish and a very durable finish as well. For anybody who hasn't watched my videos or doesn't know what Odie's oil is, it's basically just a tung oil based hard wax oil finish. And what that basically is just a blend of a bunch of different natural oils and waxes that penetrate into the wood fibers and protects and enhances the wood. And even though it's an oil, when it cures, it's completely dry as long as you remove all of the excess. Odie's oil is also completely non-toxic and food safe, which is the reason why you don't see me wearing gloves in this shot. So to apply the Odie's oil, I'm just using a 1500 grit Merkur Milan pad, and I'm just using circular motions to apply the Odie's to the wood surface. and you could see that beautiful mahogany wood grain start to pop and come back to life. This is one of my favorite parts of refinishing, is seeing either the Odie's oil or whatever top coat I'm using just start to bring that wood grain back to life. It's so satisfying. And this is one of my favorite parts as well, when the drawers have really spectacular wood grains such as burled walnut, or like this one has crotch mahogany. They're just absolutely stunning, and compared to how dull they looked before, it's so nice to see them come back to life. Okay, so for all of the trim work now, I'm going to be using Odie's Super Duper Everlasting Oil, which is similar to the Universal Oil, but just a little thinner in consistency. So I think it's going to be a little bit easier to apply it to all of the very detailed trim work. And you're going to notice here that when I put it on, the stain actually lightens quite a bit. But that's okay, that's actually what I was anticipating happening. And that's because I sanded to a pretty high grit on the trim work, and the higher the grit that you sand to, the less the stain will actually adhere to the wood. So if I was going for a much lighter stain, which is what I was going for in this case, I would sand a lot higher. I would sand to like a 320 grit, let's say. If I was looking for a much deeper, darker stain, I would sand to maybe 180 grit. And because when you sand, the stain basically settles into the scratch patterns that you make while you're sanding, the grit that you sand to is going to have a big impact on the way that your stain appears. So I just wanted to add that in there. Alright, we're almost finished. But first I just have to take care of this hardware. And to do that, I'm using some Brasso, just putting a little bit on the surface of the hardware with a brush. And I would wear some protective equipment if you're going to use this stuff, because I accidentally got some in my eye, and that was no fun. It burned so bad. I'm going to let it sit for about 10 minutes, and you can tell it's working because of that blue color, which is some kind of chemical reaction with the tarnish, and is a great way to tell that the Brasso is actually working. And I'm just going to give this a really good scrub with my nylon brush, And don't be gentle with this part. You really want to get in there and really scrub all of that tarnish off. Rinsing it in some soapy water. And next I'm going to use Meguiar's compound. And this compound is really good for bringing out the natural luster in the brass. And all I'm doing is taking a little bit, applying it to the surface of the hardware, and then taking my Dremel with a cotton wheel and buffing it out. Now the only difference here is I'm actually not going to be polishing these to a complete shine. I'm actually going to be leaving a little bit of tarnish, because if you remember before, I am going for more of a rustic kind of a look for this piece, and I think this is going to be a little bit more appropriate, and it's going to match the whole look of the dresser a lot better. They are going to have a beautiful shine to them when I'm finished, but I'm going to be leaving just a little bit of tarnish here and there, just to give it a little bit more of a weathered kind of rustic look. And you can see what I mean right here. The one on the right is polished, and the one on the left still needs to be polished. Alright, so my Odie's oil has sat for about an hour and a half, which is usually the amount of time that I leave it on for, and I'm just going to begin buffing it off. And when I say buffing it off, I mean everything. You want to get every last bit of residue off of the piece. And I usually start with a lint-free towel just to get the bulk off. And then after I've gotten the bulk of the Odie's off, I'll come in with a shop towel and get the rest. And I don't show it, but I also used a Q-tip on the bottom and on the trim work just to get in all those really detailed areas. So just a little tip. And finally, for the last step, I'm just going to be putting some hemp oil in these beautiful mahogany drawers. And I'm just using a rag to apply it. Alright, well, I just want to say thank you so much for watching yet another video. I had a lot of fun making it. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I usually try to put out a video every 2 weeks. I still have a day job, so it's a little bit hard for me to work every day on these pieces. But I find the time. It's really fun and very gratifying for me. I absolutely love doing this. But anyway, without any further ado, this is what this piece looked like before. And I really hope you guys enjoy the reveal.